This is Bob Flaws with another YouTube segment brought to you by Blue Poppy. And in this segment, I'd like to talk about a very famous 17th century Chinese doctor, Fu Qing-zhu. Fu Qing-zhu is arguably the single most important pre-modern gynecologist in Chinese medicine. And I'd like to talk about Fu Qing-zhu in part because his life was very remarkable, but I'd also like to say something about his contribution to Chinese medicine. In terms of Fu Qing-zhu's life, Fu Qing-zhu was born in the early part of the 17th century, and because of that, he got to live through the collapse of the Ming Dynasty and the ascendancy of the Qing Dynasty. The Qing Dynasty was the Manchu Dynasty, Manchus, of course, being seen as foreign invading barbarians by ethnic Chinese. Fu Qing-zhu came from a very well-educated and erudite family. He was known as being extremely smart. He passed the imperial exams at a very young age, but in point of fact, he declined to work within the imperial bureaucracy. He did spend a great deal of time studying both the Taoist and Buddhist teachings, besides just Confucian teachings. When the Qing came to power, Fu Qing-zhu was part of the resistance. He was put in prison. When he was let out of prison, he refused to kowtow to the Manchu overlords. He ran severe risks of being imprisoned or even executed. In terms of his professional life, Fu Qing-zhu practiced medicine, and he was such a great Chinese doctor that people came from all over China to be diagnosed and treated by him, and his contemporaries did refer to him as a divine doctor, which in Chinese society is the highest accolade a doctor can have in pre-modern Chinese society. To be a divine or godly doctor was absolutely the highest honor one could have. Fu Qing-zhu is remembered for leaving us two important books. One is titled Fu Qing-zhu Nuke, which means Fu Qing-zhu's Gynecology, and the other book is Fu Qing-zhu Nanke, Fu Qing-zhu's Andrology, or Fu Qing-zhu on male diseases, meaning sexual dysfunction, male sexual dysfunction and urinary tract disorders. And it is the gynecology book that is more famous today. In fact, you cannot be a well-educated Chinese gynecologist without really having read Fu Qing-zhu's Gynecology, being familiar with it. It is simply that important. To say that you're a Chinese gynecologist and not having read Fu Qing-zhu's Gynecology is a contradiction in terms. Fu Qing-zhu, unlike some of his contemporary Chinese scholar doctors, wrote in everyday speech. He did not write in the classical language, but he wrote in everyday speech, and he was very plain speaking. In every chapter of the book, when he discusses each new disease, the chapter starts with, well, everybody else says this about this disease, but my experience is this other thing. So for every disease that we traditionally have in Chinese gynecology, Fu Qing-zhu added a new whole pattern or a new whole way of seeing and treating that disease. And he was right so often that essentially all the patterns that he added to the diseases of Chinese gynecology, and even his formulas for those patterns, we still use today. We still today, many of Fu Qing-zhu's formulas are some of the most famous formulas within Chinese medicine, And when we study gynecology as an undergraduate today, when we learn the pattern discrimination of different gynecological diseases, maybe our teachers don't tell us that this pattern was added by Fu Qing-zhu, and this pattern was added by Fu Qing-zhu, and this pattern was added by Fu Qing-zhu. But in point of fact, all of what he added is simply part of standard contemporary Chinese gynecology. So if you would like to read about Fu Qing-zhu, his life, and also read his gynecology book, that is available from Blue Poppy in translation. In fact, it was one of the very first translations we did of a pre-modern book. It was one of the very first of our Great Masters series. It's called simply Fu Qing-zhu's Gynecology. And so for all of those out there that are currently specializing in gynecology or think that you would like to specialize in gynecology, you absolutely must read this book. I recommend it without any reservation whatsoever. Thank you.